Good evening. My name is Grant Baker. I'm the president of the UT Objectivism Society, and on behalf of UTOS, welcome to our debate, Christianity, Good or Bad for Mankind. Before we begin, let's turn off our phones, recording devices, and other disruptive electronics. Audio or video recording is absolutely prohibited. As a reminder, disruptive individuals will be removed from the auditorium by UTPD. In the event of an emergency, exits are located in the front, middle, and back of the auditorium. For those of you live streaming the event tonight in groups, please consider making a donation from the event Facebook page. I would like to give special thanks to the Objective Standard, which made this event tonight possible. I would also like to thank the paying members of UTOS, the volunteers who worked tirelessly to promote this event, and especially Brittany Rivera, who has worked months bringing this debate together. Great job, Ms. Rivera. Moderating tonight is Professor Drew Thornley. A native of Jasper, Alabama, Drew Thornley is a graduate of the University of Alabama and Harvard Law School. A licensed attorney, Drew has spent time in private practice in the nonprofit and public policy arenas and is now a full-time lecturer in the Department of Business, Government, and Society at the McCombs School of Business at UT Austin. Please join me in welcoming Professor Drew Thornley. Thanks.
Good evening and welcome. It's nice to see all of you, even though I can't actually see any of you right now. We appreciate that you joined us tonight. Tonight, two scholars, one a conservative Christian, the other an objectivist atheist, will square off on the question, Christianity, good or bad for mankind? Taking the position that Christianity is good for mankind is Dinesh D'Souza. Mr. D'Souza has had a 25-year career as a writer, scholar, and public intellectual. A former policy analyst in the Reagan White House, Mr. D'Souza also served as the John M. Olin Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and president of the King's College in New York City. Mr. D'Souza is the executive producer and co-director of the film 2016, Obama's America, and the author of many books, including the New York Times best-selling books Illiberal Education, What's So Great About Christianity, The Roots of Obama's Rage, and Obama's America, Unmaking the American Dream. Taking the position that Christianity is bad is Andrew Bernstein. With a PhD in philosophy from the Graduate School of the City University of New York, Dr. Bernstein teaches philosophy at SUNY Purchase, was named Outstanding Teacher of the Year in 2004. He is a contributing editor of the Objective Standard and the author of several books as well, including Objectivism in One Lesson, An Introduction to the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, and Capitalist Solutions, A Philosophy of American Moral Dilemmas. Dr. Bernstein's book in progress is titled Religion versus Man. The format of tonight's debate is as follows. As agreed to beforehand by the debaters, Andy will present first. He will speak for 15 minutes, and then Dinesh will speak for 15 minutes. These are the opening statements. Next, each will be given 15 minutes for a response, and then finally, there will be a 5-minute reply to that response. Following the presentations from our two debaters, we will open things up to a Q&A with you, our audience members. This period will last for 20 minutes. I'll speak more on this later when the time comes. Finally, once the Q&A period has concluded, each of the presenters will spend 2 minutes in closing remarks. We ask that you please give each debater your attention and utmost respect as they speak. Please now join me in welcoming each presenter to the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome. Dr. Bernstein, your first 15 minutes.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? All right. Now, the criticisms I'm going to make are applicable to any religion, to Judaism, Islam, any of them, applicable to religion as such. But since Dinesh is concerned to defend Christianity, I'll confine my criticisms to Christianity. Now, the crimes of Christianity against mankind are too lengthy to go into in a debate, so just a few. We could say in the modern Western world, Christianity has been defanged by the rational principles of the Enlightenment. But for 1,200 years, from the 4th century A.D., when Constantine first made Christianity the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, right through the 16th century Reformation, for 1,200 years, Christianity was the dominant philosophy of the Western world. What was that like? Well, just to take a few examples. The Arians, who disagreed with the Orthodox Catholics on the nature of Jesus, bloody disagreement, thousands of Arians were killed by the church. The suppression of the Manichaean heresy was even worse. The church suppressed it in the 5th century. It reemerges in the 13th. The Pope's army of heretic hunters bursts into the city of Béziers in modern-day France, slaughters 20,000 of the heretics, men, women, children, babies, the elderly, and the papal emissary writes to the Pope, God's justice is a wonderful thing. Even into the 16th century, even after the Renaissance has begun to bring reason back into the Western world, the Christians are still at it, still slaughtering each other in the Protestant-Catholic wars. For instance, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, thousands of Protestants murdered. Now, I could go on. There's no need. Why? I mean, after all, Jesus preaches peace and love. There are even some Christians who practice it. I know a few. But the violence comes, the brutality comes from the philosophical essence of Christianity. And the philosophical essence of any religion, including Christianity, is that there's an all-powerful God in a supernatural world that we know by faith and we must obey. Now, supernaturalism and faith, these are the essence of Christianity. There's a world higher than this one that takes precedence over this world. And how do we gain knowledge? Primarily by reading the Bible and taking its beliefs without challenge. Now, on these premises, you can believe anything. You can believe that the graves open and the dead rise and walk the streets of Jerusalem. You could believe bushes speak, men live inside whales, virgins give birth, God wills that the infidels be slaughtered, etc. Now, if you object by saying, well, Jesus says peace and love, well, he also says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, which means unbelievers burn in hell for all eternity. But the main point is this. On faith-based premises, if the clergy, whether it's the Pope, Luther, Calvin, the Puritan elders, if the clergy says that the unbelievers are the enemies of Jesus, they will destroy God's church, they will spread spiritual sedition, they must be annihilated, they must be burnt. On faith-based premises, how do we know that belief is false? There's no way to know it's false. You can't prove it one way or the other. There's no evidence. There's no facts. There's no rational analysis. It's just one denomination's faith-based beliefs against another. Fervently, passionately held faith-based beliefs with no possibility of rational persuasion, no facts to point to establish, one is wrong and the other one is right. And consequently, the inevitable brutality and violence that fills the history of Christianity for 1,200 years when it was the dominant religion, dominant philosophy of the Western world. There's only two ways to deal with human beings. You deal with them by reason or you deal with them by force. There's no other possibility. And with reason subordinated to faith, rational persuasion is subordinated to force. With rational proof abrogated, physical violence is necessitated. This is why the history of Christianity is the bloody spectacle that it is. Related, politically, Christianity necessitates a theocratic dictatorship. Now, the reason for that is, for man's law to be virtuous, it must put into practice God's law. Who best knows God's law? The clergy or theologians who devote their lives to it. Therefore, in order for man's law to put into practice God's law, the clergy must be invested with full political authority, and then they force you to obey the Christian version of morality. And I could give you any number of examples. The church during the Dark Ages Calvin's theocratic dictatorship in Geneva in the 16th century, the Puritan elders in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Whenever Christianity is the dominant philosophy of a culture, theocratic dictatorship is the inevitable political result. What does it look like to force you to obey the Christian version of morality? Well, to take one example out of many, in Calvin's Geneva, the Reformed Church, if they found a single woman pregnant, they drowned her. If they found who the father was, they killed him too. Adultery was a capital offense. They executed people for adultery. This is what Christianity looks like in practice when it is not diluted and defanged by the rational principles of the Enlightenment. Let's put it this way. In the modern Western world, Christianity ain't what it used to be. It has been eviscerated, thank God, but like I said, by the rational principles of the Enlightenment. Now, if somebody says, if the unbelievers reject God, maybe it's right to kill them, maybe it's good, we should kill them. This raises the question of moral philosophy. What is the good? What is right? What is wrong? What is the standard by which we judge good and evil? Now, Christianity says it's God's will. If God says X is good, it's good because he says so. If God says non-X is evil, it's evil because he says so. But the question, is there a fact-based, objective, rational standard of moral value? One that's based in facts, not in faith. Now, the answer to that is yes. In Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand defines just such a fact-based, rational standard of moral value. Good and evil arise only because living beings must achieve specific goals in order to sustain their lives. Plants, for example, must dig their roots into the soil to gain the chemical nutrients their lives require. They must grow their leaves towards the sun to get sunlight. This is what their lives require. Animals must hunt to gain food, otherwise they starve. They must find shelter from the storm, otherwise they die. These are the values nature stipulates for their survival and for flourishing life. Human beings must grow food, build houses, learn how to cure diseases, otherwise our life will be very short. Nature requires us to gain certain values in order to sustain our lives on Earth. Now, the good then for a species is that which, given its nature, given the factual requirements of its survival on Earth, is that which promotes its life. For man then, for a rational being, the good for man is that which factually, objectively promotes his life. For example, nutritious food, an education, living in a free society. And the evil is that which factually undermines or harms human life. For example, poison, ignorance, the imposition of dictatorship, religion. Christianity rejects this rational standard of moral value, this fact-based standard of moral value. God's will, not the requirements of human life, is what determines good and evil. Now, this is one critical reason for the countless innocent lives killed by Christianity in the name of Christianity. If God wills that the sinners or the unbelievers be killed, then his faithful servants carry that out. It has often been observed how much brutality is perpetrated in the name of God, including by Christians. This is the reason. If God's will is primary, then human life is secondary. And in the Old Testament, of course, God kills God knows how many. The fundamental principle is when man's life is subordinated to any consideration, an alleged God's will or another, that human lives will be sacrificed to the ruling concern and men will then die. Lots of them. In fact, prior to the 20th century rise of communism and National Socialism, if we ask the question, what denomination or group is responsible historically for murdering more innocent Christians than any other? The answer to that would have to be other Christians. Now, if the good is to promote human life, the question is, by what means? As Ayn Rand establishes in Atlas Shrugged, reason is man's instrument of survival. Every value human life depends on requires the rational mind. We must learn how to grow food. We must learn agricultural science, agricultural technology, which requires reason. We must build houses, requires knowledge of architecture, engineering, mathematics, requires the rational mind. We must learn how to cure diseases, which requires knowledge of biological science, the rational mind. I could go on. All values that human life depend on are the product of the reasoning mind. Reason is mankind's instrument of survival, the same way a bird's wings is the bird's instrument of survival. Now, Christianity subordinates reason to faith. When it is undiluted, when it is the dominant intellectual influence in a society, Christianity subordinates reason to faith. Now, in the Middle Ages, for like 1,000 years, when it was the dominant cultural influence, unrestrained by rational principles of the Enlightenment, it warred relentlessly against the mind. Just to give you a few examples. Justinian I, Christian emperor, closes the Greek schools of philosophy in 529 AD because they're inherently pernicious to Christian faith. He forbids any pagans to teach. Will Durant, the great American historian, points out that after 1,100 years, this often of glorious achievement, this effectively ended Greek philosophy. In the East, in Alexandria, a Christian mob murders Hypatia, in fact, tears her body apart. A Christian mob, including monks, led by a member of Bishop Cyril's staff, murders the Greek mathematician Hypatia. Now, the historian of science, Maurice Klein, points out that the murder of Hypatia symbolizes the end of Greek mathematics. The Christians suppressed the Greek intellectual tradition. Read Charles Freeman's book, The Closing of the Western Mind, The Rise of Faith and the Fall of Reason. The Christians suppressed the glorious achievements of the Greek intellectual tradition. They suppressed Greek philosophy. They suppressed Greek science. They suppressed Greek mathematics and brought on a dark age that lasted for centuries. Now, let me close with this. I could go on with the historical examples. They're endless, of Christian brutality when Christianity was undiluted, before it was eviscerated. There's two philosophical reasons why. The philosophy is much more important than the history. There's two philosophical reasons why Christianity perpetrates endless crimes against mankind. One, Christianity rejects man's life as the standard of moral value, so human life means less to the Christians than the enforcement of faith-based orthodoxy. Compliance to a faith-based religious orthodoxy, not human life, is the Christian standard of what is good or bad. And secondly, Christianity subordinates reason to faith. When mankind's instrument of survival is secondary, then human survival is secondary, and many human beings will not survive, have not survived, and cannot survive under Christianity.
Mr. D'Souza, your 15 minutes.
I'm very pleased and honored to be here, and looking forward to a debate not just against an atheist, but a particular kind of an atheist who is an objectivist and a sort of subscriber to the tenets of Ayn Rand, a woman for whom I have great respect. The question before us is whether Christianity has been good or bad for the world. And in my rebuttal, to come later, I'm going to address a number of the specific points raised by Andrew Bernstein. Here, I actually want to make a positive case. I want to show what Christianity has done for the world. Now, one way to do that is to ask what the world would look like if Christianity had never existed. What would our world be like? I'm going to take a little bit of a different path, and I'm actually going to begin by laying out some of the key tenets of objectivism itself. In other words, I want to lay out some of the key tenets that Andrew Bernstein believes in. And you'll see these are not tenets that are believed by only the followers of Rand. They're actually tenets that many of us believe in as well. For example, one of the key tenets of objectivism is the idea of the individual. That the individual matters, that the individual can't just be subordinated to the collective or to society. Second, the idea of freedom The idea that freedom is important in a society, and freedom means to some degree choice. We have the right to shape our own lives. We have the right to economic freedom, to political freedom, to freedom of thought and expression and conscience. So the idea of freedom is critical. The idea of equality of rights, not equality of results or outcomes, but the idea that we have equal rights under the law. And the idea of equal rights comes out of the sense that, in a sense, no man has the right to rule another man, if you will, by nature. That these rights are in nature itself. Jefferson called them natural rights, and the Greeks did as well. So these are some of the key ideas of objectivism. The idea of science, of rational inquiry, about investigating the world using the faculties of reason. Now, you get the impression, listening to Andrew Bernstein, that all of these ideas are sort of products of the Enlightenment. Never seems to have occurred to him to ask, where did the Enlightenment come from? Why did we have an Enlightenment in the West? Why wasn't there a Hindu Enlightenment? Where's the African Enlightenment? The Enlightenment among the Aztecs? Why did the Enlightenment occur in Western civilization? In other words, is the Enlightenment the enemy of Christianity? Or was it to some degree also the product of Christianity? Let's look, for example, at where Western civilization comes from. A civilization that included the Renaissance and the Reformation and the Enlightenment, not to mention the Scientific Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. First of all, most historians will agree that the two founding pillars of Western civilization are Athens and Jerusalem. By Athens, of course, we mean the legacy of classical Greece and Rome. And by Jerusalem, we mean Judaism and also Christianity. These are the two sort of anchors on which Western civilization was built. And the ideas of Western civilization come out of one or other tributary of the West. Some people think they come out of a hybrid of Athens and Jerusalem, but we can actually reasonably trace particular ideas in the West to one or the other. So first of all, we can ask the idea of the individual. Was that a powerful idea in ancient Greece and Rome before Christianity? No. True, you have powerful individuals. For example, on the Greek stage, we have Oedipus, who's an individual in his own right, but individualism is essentially scarce in ancient Greece and Rome. What about the idea of freedom, of liberty? Of property, of contracts, of free trade? None of this can be found anywhere, really, in ancient Greece and Rome, certainly not in any sort of systematic sense in those civilizations, which are actually defined by imperialism, conquest, force, mass-scale slavery in the case of Rome. The Spartans, of course, would deposit the sick child on the hillside, happy to find it dead in the morning. Infanticide, euthanasia, pederasty, these were extremely common in, you may say, Athens. So, if these libertarian or objectivist ideas cannot easily be traced to Athens, where do they come from? The answer, in fact, the only answer, is that they have their roots in Jerusalem. Now, at first glance, this may seem incredible, the idea of reason, of the individual, of property being somehow a Christian legacy. But when you begin to look a little more closely at history, you see that it's actually quite true. Take, for example, the fact that we're having this debate right now, where? In a university. Who started the university system? Was it founded in the Enlightenment? Nonsense. The first universities were started in medieval Europe. They grew out of the system of monasteries that dotted the continent before universities got started. And the first universities, the University of Paris, the University of Bologna, and of course later in America, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. Have you noticed that of the 8 Ivy League colleges, 7 of them were explicitly started as Christian institutions? It's not an accident. They might have been started by this denomination or that, but my point is these were universities explicitly started not just by Christians, but with a Christian mission, which gives you some sense that this idea of reason, far from being hostile to Christianity, was seen as completely consistent with it. Consider the idea of science. We might wonder, why did science develop in Western civilization? Human curiosity, presumably, is universal. And we know, of course, that the Mayans would develop a calendar, and the Chinese would record the eclipses. But what we call science, which includes criticism, laboratories, checking, verification, the whole ensemble of practices that leads to what Whitehead calls the invention of invention. This is a Western idea. Again, I ask you, what was the Greek contribution to science? It's virtually nil. What did the Romans invent? Almost nothing. The fact is, technological ingenuity began in a major way in the Middle Ages, and it began small, improving the stirrup, improving forms of weaponry, but ultimately building the Gothic cathedrals. Think of those as an architectural and scientific accomplishment. And later, of course, if you think of all the great scientists, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Faraday, Pascal, Mersenne, Gassendi, and on and on and on. If you make a full list, you will be stunned to realize that the vast majority of them were Christians. And not only did they happen to be Christian, but as in the case of Galileo and Kepler and Newton, they saw their work as revealing, if you will, God's handiwork in the universe. Now, why is this important? It's important because in Christianity, God is seen as omniscient, as knowing everything. By the way, this is not common to other religions. And in other religions, God may be seen as all-powerful, but God is not really a knower. The idea that God knows everything is something specific to Christianity. And it's important because Christians have figured that since God is omniscient, He designed the world in a particular way that reflects, if you will, His omniscience. And since we are made in God's image, it's sort of our particular talent or vocation to be able to go and figure out the world and through it discover, if you will, the fingerprints of God. This is a powerful motivating force, even for science, and I would argue even today. Now, Andrew Bernstein has spoken consistently of faith as if it was a bad word. I would argue that all of modern science is based on a certain kind of faith. And I'm going to come back in my rebuttal to what faith actually means. He seems to think it's just stating nonsense in contradiction with reason. I will give a completely different definition of faith, which applies both to religion and to science. The kind of scientific faith I'm talking about is the faith that we live in a rational cosmos. By the way, that is not a finding of modern science. That is an assumption of modern science. We assume that if we can measure light going at a particular speed here and now, that light has always traveled at that speed in the past. We have no way of going into the past and actually measuring light then. But we assume that light, and we assume that on a star 10 light years away or 100 light years away, light still goes at that speed. Do we know that? Have we been there? Have we measured it? No. But we assume that light everywhere and always travels at the same speed, c. That is called faith. And faith here is not in contradiction to evidence. Faith is actually going where evidence can't reach. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. I do want to address head-on the idea that Christianity suppressed the legacy of Greek philosophy, of Roman learning, and I actually want to look at what actually happened historically. So the Roman Empire, which was the wonder of the Western world, was besieged by barbarians from Northern Europe, the Huns, the Lombards, the Vandals, and so on. These barbarians, who were by no means Christian, they were pagan, came into Rome, and the Roman Empire had become overstretched, decadent, and essentially was unable to defend itself. And this Roman edifice was leveled. The Roman legions were no more. They were smashed by the barbarians. So who destroyed Rome? It was a combination of barbarian force and Roman whimpery. The Christians had nothing to do with it. Roman learning was smashed because the Romans couldn't defend it any longer. And Europe was reduced, in a sense, to rubble. Out of that rubble, Christianity began to rebuild the continent, and began to rebuild it slowly, but without a lot of the corrupt practices that had defined Roman civilization. So, for example, Rome was based on mass-scale slavery. Slavery was very common in Western civilization. Andrew Bernstein may say, well, it took the Enlightenment to abolish. Nonsense. Slavery was ended in Europe between the 4th century and the 10th century. By the 10th century, which was the medieval era, no Renaissance, no Reformation, it was all Christian, just as he says. Slavery disappeared from Europe. Slavery later had a big revival, and there was a second wave of abolition in the modern era, which I'll be happy to come to later. But my point is, the Christians didn't level Roman civilization out of the rubble of Europe, created by the decadence, corruption, irresponsibility, and weakness of Rome. The Christians reconstituted Western civilization, rediscovered Roman learning and Greek learning. That was the whole point of Thomas Aquinas, that Aristotle had been rediscovered, and Aquinas, in a sense, created a synthesis between Aristotelian learning and Christianity. So the bottom line of it is that even the core ideas of objectivism, if you trace their intellectual roots far back enough, not just stopping clumsily at the Enlightenment and pretending like history was invented anew because reason was discovered and everyone before was a fool. No, if you trace the historical lineage of the Enlightenment itself, you find that it is standing, if you will, on the unrecognized pillar of Athens and Jerusalem. It is standing on the unrecognized pillar of Christianity itself. Thank you very much.
Dr. Bernstein, your 15-minute response rebuttal.
Dinesh raises a number of points that I want to get to in my next rebuttal. But right now, I came here to make the case against Christianity, and by God, I'm going to do it. So the essence of the case is philosophical. Let me look at the philosophical essence of religion. The religious belief is that, or the Christian belief is that God exists independently of the world, antecedently to the world. He exists before the world, and He creates the world and He governs the world. So this cosmic consciousness, God, is independent, whereas existence is dependent on consciousness. That's the Christian belief. Now, what's the philosophical truth about this? Now, as Ayn Rand puts it, I think brilliantly, existence exists. By existence, she means the sum total of everything that exists, the universe. To prove that, all we have to do is open our eyes and look out at reality. And right now, I can't see a damn thing, but I can hear people out there. I can see this. I know the world exists. All we have to do is look out at it. Now, besides that's the first philosophical principle I want to establish. Existence exists. It is. It is. And sometimes I think we ought to just stop and realize what that means. The universe is. Undeniable truth. Furthermore, secondly, the things that exist. A thing is what it is, and nothing else. This is the law of identity. A is A. A thing is what it is. Steel is steel. It's not paper mache. Penicillin is penicillin. It's not sulfuric acid. This is the law of identity. A thing is what it is, symbolized by A is A. Third, because a thing is what it is, it acts in accordance with what it is. Go back to my two examples. We can use steel to build a skyscraper. We can't build one out of paper mache. We could use penicillin to cure certain diseases. We can't do that with sulfuric acid. Because a thing what it is, it acts in accordance with what it is. This is the law of causality. What a thing is determines what it can and cannot do. Now, a further point, basic philosophy here. The apprehension or understanding that something exists or anything exists involves another key philosophic principle, consciousness, the faculty that perceives existence. Our mind, our consciousness is real. It's the means by which we know the world. Now, here's the key philosophical question. What is the relationship between existence and consciousness? The world out here in our minds. Is one fundamental and the other derivative? Now, existence, logically, necessarily, existence precedes consciousness because consciousness is consciousness of an object. To be conscious is to be conscious of something, whether it's the podium, the room, the people in it. Awareness is awareness of an object. To be conscious is to be conscious of something. If there is no existence, there is nothing to be aware of, and there could be no consciousness. To hold that consciousness is aware of nothing but itself is an impossibility. Consciousness of what? Related, we perceive that which exists. We can see or touch this table over here, for example, but we cannot, by a sheer act of will or thinking, alter it. So I can see or touch the table, but I cannot will it to fly, to transmute into a refrigerator, or to sing the Yellow Rose of Texas. Existence exists independent of consciousness, of any consciousness. That's a key philosophical principle. Existence exists independent of consciousness, of any consciousness. Consciousness, on the other hand, is dependent on existence. And Ayn Rand calls this the primacy of existence principle. The primacy of existence principle. Consciousness is a dependent. It depends on existence. Now, religion violates this basic principle, including Christianity, violates this basic principle of irrational philosophy. Christianity starts not with existence, but with an all-knowing mind or consciousness. Conscious of what? Of nothing. For prior to creation, there is nothing. Logical impossibility number one. Related, every fact we know about consciousness, without exception, shows us that it requires bodily means, a brain, a nervous system, a living body. In Dinesh's book, What's So Great About Christianity, he says, quote, "Our best bet is to go with what we know so far and draw conclusions based on that," unquote. Let me repeat that. Quote, "Our best bet is to go with what we know so far and draw conclusions based on that," unquote. Page 154 of What's So Great About Christianity. Now, that's exactly right. I agree with Dinesh 100% on that. Consciousness without bodily means, given everything we know, this is logical impossibility number two. Further, by an act of will, God's mind creates the universe. But consciousness is a faculty of perception. It cannot, by a sheer act of thinking or willing, create anything, create an object from nothing. What does God create the universe from? From himself, the spiritual being, which cannot even exist prior to existence? How do you create a material universe from a spiritual being? No. If you start with nothing, you end with nothing. Creation in a religious sense is impossibility, logical impossibility number three. Now I can go on, but we have enough data to draw the conclusion. There is no God. There is no creation of the universe. The universe is eternal, always was, always will be. Existence exists. We have to accept that. I mean, we don't have to accept it. It's a free country. But if we're going to hold a rational and accurate view of the universe, logically we need to accept it. Now, I want to get to intelligent design, which a lot of Christians and a lot of religious people generally, I think including Dinesh, certainly he talks about in his book. Let me point something out. The establishment of intelligent design, if it could be proven, which it cannot, I'm going to disprove it, the establishment of intelligent design would not validate Christianity. In fact, it would refute Christianity in a different form. Because on these premises, God then designed the world in order to create a rational being, one whose mind is his instrument of survival. Such a God would necessarily celebrate reason and those who developed it. The Greeks, especially Aristotle, the Enlightenment philosophers, such great scientists as Charles Darwin and others, I would add Ayn Rand, those who use their rational minds to promote human life on earth, they're the ones who would be celebrated by such a God. Now, what are the enemies of reason? You know, what of the Catholic Church who suppressed, Dinesh didn't mention, in the Middle Ages, the suppression of the philosophers by the church. For 500 years, between Boethius and Abelard, there was one original philosopher, John Scotus Erigena. And naturally, he was condemned by the church, and one of his books so thoroughly burned by the church that not a single copy survives. Peter Abelard, the greatest European mind since Aristotle for 1,500 years, was hounded constantly by the church, had his books burned, and was finally condemned by the Pope to a decree of silence. He was forbidden to ever speak or write. I could go on and on. This is the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages. Now, what would happen to these enemies of reason if there was such a God? These religious creatures who suppress the rational mind in the name of faith, what would happen to them? They will burn in hell. All these faith-based Christian monsters who suppress the rational mind for 1,200 years, they're going to burn. This is Bernstein's wager, a long overdue answer to Pascal's wager. If God designed human life, he designed reason and expects us to use it. Reason shows that atheism is true, primacy of existence principle. Therefore, rational atheists go to heaven. This is not funny. Thank you, I appreciate the support. It's not funny. I'm serious. Those who use faith or anything else, the Nazis with their visceral gut feelings, the communists with philosophical materialism and brute force, any of these creatures who use faith or whatever it is to suppress reason, mankind's survival instrument, are therefore terrible sinners, and they will burn in hell. Therefore, wager always on reason and rational atheism, knowing that if there is a designer, he will reward those true to the reasoning mind that he designed, and will punish all those who suppress the reasoning mind, mankind's survival instrument. This is Bernstein's wager. But intelligent design is false. Now, Mr. D'Souza and plenty of other religious people today quote various scientists to the effect that if the laws of nature were different, such as gravitation, then life would be impossible. The laws of nature on this view, on the intelligent design view, are fine-tuned or designed to make human life possible. And I've already shown that design of the universe is impossible. Aside from raising the unanswerable question of who designed the designer, and then who designed the designer of the designer, and so on in an infinite regress, which is logically impossible, aside from that, intelligent design requires that consciousness exists independently of and antecedently to existence, then consciousness creates and governs existence, a logical impossibility. So creation design is out on strictly logical grounds. But the claim that life is the result of chance is equally false. There's a lot of scientists and people who come to this conclusion. It's just philosophically mistaken. The concept of chance does not apply to metaphysical reality, to reality as such. Instead of chance, there are causal laws based on identity. Now, what can philosophy say about the development of life? Here are two philosophic certainties. One, to be is to be something. A thing is what it is, the law of identity. Two, because a thing is what it is, it acts in accordance with its nature, the law of causality. Consequently, the universe is lawful and orderly. The universe, Dinesh, is not rational. Human beings are rational. The universe is lawful and orderly. Indeed, the concept of an unlawful or disorderly universe is a logical impossibility, for it would require things to act in violation to their nature, not in accordance with what they are, but in accordance with what they are not. Now, some people, I think Dinesh argues that it's possible that the laws of nature could be otherwise, for instance, gravity. No. Possible means that given the laws of nature, something could occur even if it has not yet, for example, a cure for cancer. The concept of possible arises and has rational meaning only within the laws of nature. It is not applicable to those laws. Given existence and the specific identity of that which exists, the law of gravity is necessitated and could not be otherwise. Therefore, events unfold in metaphysical reality, apart from human choices, with a majestic and awesome necessity. They are inexorable. For example, given the specific identities or components of our solar system, the sun's emission of a specific amount of radiation, the Earth's distance from the sun, the Earth's gravitational pull and ability to hold an atmosphere, etc. Because of these things and what they are, the development of life on Earth is necessitated by the laws of nature. There is no chance here. There is no conscious design. There is the inexorable unfolding in specific forms of the law of identity. Notice that physically a living being is formed matter, when the specific chemical elements of life, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, etc., are formed into a certain structure or arrangement, then life results. Nature is dynamic. Process is ubiquitous. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus observed this long ago. The chemical elements of life exist. Change is a constant. Matter is endlessly reformed. Over billions of years, it is inevitable that the specific arrangements of the specific elements that constitute simple life forms occur and then give rise to the evolutionary process. Given sufficient time, and probably very little, such events are inescapable. The origin of life is neither in accord with the law of chance nor the law of God, but with the law of identity. Now let me finish. What does Christianity say on the origin of life? From Genesis, quote, "And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let fowl fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that creepeth. Then the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul," unquote, from Genesis. Now, do I need to comment on this? I mean, the contrast between a rational analysis of the origins of life and Christian belief I think, is too stark for me to have to comment on.
Mr. D'Souza, your 15-minute response rebuttal.
When I was a kid growing up in Bombay, I would be taken by my parents to a Catholic church, where I would often hear in the sermon a priest or a pastor harangue about, this is the way it is. This is why God exists, and the Bible says this, and the Bible says that. And I remember, as I grew a little bit older, becoming a little disgusted with this mode of argument, because it was not a mode of argument at all. It was just an appeal to the Bible. And quite oddly, sitting here tonight and listening to Andrew Bernstein, I got the same creepy feeling. I got the same creepy feeling that I was listening to a certain kind of an atheist pastor. The only difference is that he didn't appeal to the Bible. He appeals to a word with a capital letter called reason. He doesn't give any reasons, but he just says reason dictates this and reason dictates that, and he expects us all to nod sheepishly and go along. He even, in fact, concludes triumphantly that reason dictates that atheism is true. Now, we're in a university setting, so we can stop talking nonsense and ask the simple question, do we know for a fact that God exists or doesn't exist? On the basis of reason, I would concede we do not know. In that sense, we are all agnostics, the believer and the unbeliever alike. Why are we agnostics? Why am I an agnostic? Because I don't know. I call myself a believer because I'm not a knower. There's a great difference between belief and knowledge. Knowledge means you know. Belief means you don't know, but you still believe. So, for example, I believe there's a place called Papua New Guinea. I've never been, but I believe it's there. But I wouldn't say I believe in my brother, because I know the guy. So the point here is that true belief is not a denial of doubt. It is the acknowledgement of it. But we see in Andrew Bernstein today no shred of a doubt. Here we are flung into the world as human beings, and if we're curious and we look around, there's a whole heck of a lot of stuff we don't know. Where'd we come from? Why does all of this even exist? This whole universe, why does it exist? What's going to come after we die, if anything? I think we'd have to admit, if we were honest, that we have no answers to the most fundamental questions of existence. In other words, we don't on the basis of reason, but he does on the basis of capital R reason. And now we begin to see what's really going on. The big R reason is simply a restatement of his own prejudices, of his own faith-based conclusions. He doesn't know what came before the world. In fact, the arguments for God can be made on the basis of reason alone. Now, you can't settle the question of God's existence or non-existence by purely appealing to philosophical nostrums. Things like, existence exists. I agree. Things are what they are. I agree. Consciousness is, existence is prior to consciousness. I agree. And so what? It is one of the most startling discoveries of modern science in recent decades that this universe of ours has a beginning, the Big Bang. And that means that first there was nothing, and then there was a universe. By the way, it is the meaning of the Big Bang that not only did the universe have a beginning, but space and time also have a beginning. Space and time are actually properties of our universe, which means that before our universe, you have to put the word before in quote marks, no space, no time. Now, who or what is responsible for this? It is not unreasonable to ask, if the universe encompasses all of nature, and all of nature had a beginning, then did nature create itself out of nothing? Or did some supernatural force, and that's all we mean here by God, bring nature into existence? I would submit that these are questions that can be discussed, but not in abstraction from the actual findings of modern science. Now, if we say that the universe had a beginning, and this beginning points to a creator, then we would be vindicating the first book of Genesis. The key point about the first book of Genesis is that the ancient Hebrews, who, by the way, were not scientists and did no experiments, they said, first there was nothing, and then there was a universe. By the way, a leading atheist, Lawrence Krauss, whom I debated recently, has written a book called The Universe Out of Nothing. And he acts as though he's refuted Christianity. I told him that is the Christian position. The universe actually came out of nothing. In fact, that is not the position of other religions, which maintain that some god or gods fashioned the universe kind of carpenter style out of pre-existing stuff. But the ancient Hebrews broke with that and said, no, there was nothing at all. No space, no time. By the way, that's the meaning of eternity. The Christian meaning of eternity is not forever and ever and ever. It is a God who exists outside of space and time. By the way, before the 20th century, in the Newtonian universe, that concept of being outside of space and time made no sense. Time seemed to stretch indefinitely in both directions. Space seems to go everywhere. How can you get outside of space? But now we know that space and time are local properties of our universe. Suddenly the concept of eternity becomes coherent in a way that it wasn't before. So yes, I agree with Andrew Bernstein that we should go with the best knowledge we have. I'm simply saying he doesn't have the best knowledge we have. He's not actually implementing modern knowledge. He's simply relying on nostrums as if in a few philosophical precepts he can settle questions that are factual questions about the world and about where it comes from. Let me say a little bit of a word here about consciousness and a little bit of a word about faith. Faith has nothing to do with the empirical world of reason. Faith is relevant where reason can't go. So, let's say, for example, is there life after death? I would say yes, there is. Andrew Bernstein would say no, there isn't. Now, the fact of the matter is, now, he may deny this, but neither of us really knows. I'll tell you a secret. He doesn't know either. Why? Because we are products of our consciousness, our brains. What happens to us afterward, none of us has a clue. What's the difference between him and me? Is it that my position for life after death is based on faith, and his position against it is based on reason? No. His position is also based on faith. The only difference is that I, as a believer, will admit it. I will admit that I'm taking a position based on faith. He, poor fellow, will keep insisting that he's taking a position based on reason. What reason? Has he interviewed any dead guys? Has he been to the other side of the curtain? Shakespeare says, death is the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler has yet returned. So the point being that what we are seeing here in this debate, and I think it's a really interesting historical switch. There was a time when the Christians were arrogant, they proclaimed this to be true, they hounded their opponents, and now we see something of the opposite. We see a certain kind of atheist arrogance masquerading as reason itself. Again, appealing to reason while giving few actual reasons. I would actually invite Andrew Bernstein to give me real reasons, empirical reasons, about why life after death is impossible, or why life after death does not exist, or about why God does not exist. Now, the other part of his opening statement that I want to address in the time I have left is the issue of the crimes of Christianity. And you notice that speaking in rapid-fire fashion, he went through a number of them, and if you listened to them and didn't know what any of them are really about, it sounded like there was an awful lot of bad stuff going on. There was this massacre on the St. Bartholomew's Day, and then there was Calvin in Geneva, and then there was this, and then there was that. The really interesting thing is you step back, go into slow motion a little bit, and start looking at these things, and then the crucial move. If he's right that the Enlightenment defanged Christianity, and things were so barbaric before, we would expect that things after the Enlightenment in Western civilization would be much more peaceful. We would expect that a defanged Christianity would give way to secular societies that are just so much more humane and less murderous and less genocidal than the ones that came before. The French Revolution was almost a revolution dedicated to reason. In fact, they changed the names of cathedrals and they essentially dedicated them to reason itself. And the French Revolution culminates in tens of thousands of people being guillotined and hanged and having their heads chopped off and rivers of blood flowing. And by the way, these are 20 to 50 times the number of people killed in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which was essentially an argument between two rival noble families in France, the Guises and the Huguenots. This has been going on since time immemorial. So even the crimes of religion, so-called, the 30 Years' War and so on, half of those crimes have nothing to do with religion. There are dynastic struggles, there are struggles over land and power. In the 30 Years' War, France, a Catholic country, ends up fighting on the Protestant side. It's clearly not a simple war of religion. There are rival powers trying to maintain their balance in Europe. Let's look at the 20th century, a century shaped by science and technology, and you might say the Enlightenment. What is the record in terms of peace of the 20th century, a century freed of religious violence? It turns out to be the most violent century in all of human history. To give you a slight basis of comparison, we heard an awful lot about people being persecuted and hounded and so on. The Inquisition, which was the worst crime of Christianity in terms of persecuting heretics, over 400 years, the Spanish Inquisition, which was the worst, killed, according to modern scholarship, which now has very reliable information on the subject, fewer than 2,000 people. Fewer than 2,000 people killed over 400 years. That's 5 guys a year. And Andrew Bernstein is inconsolable about this historical crime and the horrible Christians. Very well. In the 20th century, I pick an atheist. I'm not even going to bother. I'm going to weaken my own case. I'm not even going to talk about Stalin or Mao. I'm just going to pick a junior little league atheist. Let's take Pol Pot. Don't even think of him. I could talk about Lenin. I could talk about Brezhnev or Chernenko. I could talk about Fidel Castro, Kim Jong-il, Ceausescu, and Verhocha. I could go on and on. I'll pick one guy, Pol Pot. By the way, educated in France, a major league atheist, a champion of reason itself. And what does Pol Pot do in the aftermath of the Vietnam War? He massacres, in a space of 3 years, 2 million people. 2 million. I mean, even bin Laden in his wildest dreams doesn't even come close. So here's the point. These are crimes that are committed in the name of atheism. And they are done according to atheist doctrine. Why? Because Marx, in the Communist Manifesto and his other writings, his discussions of Hegel and so on, says that the belief in the afterlife is the enemy of this life. Religion is a drug. We have to get rid of it to create the new man and the new utopia. Now, sure enough, Andrew Bernstein will say, well, but that's not really reason. And it is true that through history, people have always sought to avoid responsibility for their own crimes or the crimes committed by their movements by pretending it's not really my team. But wait a minute, let's be fair. If the Christians should take responsibility for the crimes committed in the name of Christianity, as I think they should, we should. But if I have to feel bad because of the Inquisition, he should feel bad for the crimes committed in the name of atheism. He doesn't then get to duck out and say, well, no, just as after the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of Marxists were like, well, that wasn't real Marxism. These people weren't really following Marxist principles. Well, okay, but the Christians weren't really following Christian principles either. So if you're going to hold the Christians responsible for what they did, fact, let's hold the atheists responsible for what they did, fact, and let's compare. And I would submit that our sad conclusion is that much of this brutality, much of this violence is not from Christianity. It is actually rooted in what Immanuel Kant called the warped timber of human nature. Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made. So my conclusion is this. Ultimately, we have to judge systems by what they have built, what they have done in the world. We can't hold them responsible for the crimes of human nature because those crimes are actually universal. Christianity actually is one of the key pivots for building the civilization that we, even secular people, live in. And I think if we recognize that and were subject a little less to the arrogance of reason, capital R, we might be able to step back and even grudgingly say, thank God for Christianity. Thank you very much.
Dr. Bernstein, your second and final response. You have 5 minutes.
A lot of stuff. Almost don't know where to begin. Let me do this quickly. Big Bang Theory, if it's true, is an example of an eternal universe theory, not of creation. It's a philosophical misinterpretation to interpret it as a creation theory. And the reason is simple. If there's an explosion, something antecedently existed that exploded. From nothing comes no explosions. I mean, if we're going to say, well, let's take this bottle of gasoline and dump it on nothing and see if we get an explosion, it's not going to happen. So I guess we have to amend Genesis now. In the beginning, there was an energy phenomenon. The point, of course, is matter exists, whether it's in the form of matter or energy. It changes its forms. It's not created. It's not destroyed. I'm not a scientist. I don't even know if the Big Bang Theory is true or not, but as a philosopher, I know this. And with certainty, despite Mr. D'Souza's claims here about big R reason or whatever, I know this with logical certainty. If there's an explosion, something existed before the explosion that exploded. Existence exists. Now, regarding the crimes of, I'm confused. I got to scratch my head here. Are we here to debate communism or national socialism? I don't think so. I think we're here to debate Christianity. So if Mr. D'Souza's argument is, well, the communists and Nazis murdered more people than the Christians, what conclusion do we come to from that? Christianity is only the second worst evil in Western history? I agree. I absolutely agree. And I win the debate. Because the debate is Christianity good or bad for mankind? And Mr. D'Souza and I have established Christianity is the second worst evil in human history. Now, regarding National Socialism and communism as examples of the Enlightenment, I mean, that's clearly false. A little bit of history here. The greatest, or the first society of reason was ancient Greece. Mr. D'Souza and other Christians' denigration of the enormity of the Greeks' achievement is insulting. It's mistaken. Philosophy is born in ancient Greece. What did you say before, Dinesh, that the Greeks contributed almost nothing to science? That is false. It is false. It is flat out false. Today, Aristotle is recognized, along with Charles Darwin, as one of the two greatest biologists in human history. You look it up if you don't believe me. Archimedes, Hippocrates, Euclid. The advances the Greeks made in science and mathematics are astounding, suppressed by the church during the Middle and Dark Ages. I'm just doing a hit or miss attack here. The Enlightenment brings back the Greek approach of rationality. You could read the leading scholar on the Enlightenment, Peter Gay. What's volume 1 of his work on the Enlightenment? The Rise of Modern Paganism, meaning the Greeks, the commitment to reason. It's not the French Revolution that's based in reason. The French Revolution was influenced largely by Rousseau, who's an overt emotionalist. It's the American Revolution that was based in reason. The leading minds of the American Enlightenment were responsible for the American Revolution. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, James Madison. Many of these men were deists. They were scornful of faith. The leading minds of the 18th century Enlightenment, including Voltaire, were a mixture. of Greek rationalism and Christian faith. With Greek rationalism and commitment to reason, big R or little r, doesn't make any difference. They're committed to reason. Thomas Paine, in his book, The Age of Reason, said, "My own mind is my own church." There's the Enlightenment attitude. These were the men who created the American Revolution. The French Revolution was created by followers of Rousseau. You read Will Durant on this. Robespierre was an enormous admirer of Rousseau, the emotionalist. And the Nazis are overt emotionalists. There's nobody who could be a better example of rejecting the Enlightenment commitment to reason than the National Socialists. How did they know their moral superiority based on racial inheritance? Did they get that from the science of biology? I don't think so. Biology shows us moral characteristics are not inherited. The Nazis answered it themselves. We just feel it in our blood and our bowels. That's a quote. We feel it in our blood and our bowels. They're overt emotionalists. They reject reason. Logic is a Jewish tool. It's sensationalism, bodily, visceral sensations and emotions that animate the National Socialists, not reason and the Enlightenment commitment to reason. The communists are almost as good an example. They're maybe better. They're philosophical materialists. They not only deny the mind's effectuality, they deny its existence. Man is body. Everything's matter. Man is body. The mind, mankind's survival instrument, doesn't exist. How do we create the products that human life depends on? Manual labor, the work of the body. And what about Aristotle's logic, Newton's laws of motion, the inventions of Watt, James Watt, or Edison that promote production? Glorified manual labor. Human beings are bodies. We're animals. How do you get animals to work? You whip them. You kill them if they don't work. This is the overt rejection of reason in the modern world. It's a product of modern German philosophy. Kant, Hegel, Marx, the unholy triumvirate, their rejection of reason. Kant says the mind can't know reality at all. We create a subjective reality that they know. Hegel subordinates the individual to the state. The mind can't know reality. The individual's helpless. He's subordinate to the state. The group is all powerful. The state is all powerful. Which group is all powerful? Hegel's followers disagree. The Nazis say the race. The communists say the economic class. They all agree. The individual is nothing. The individual mind can't know reality. He's helpless. He's subordinate to the state. His life and mind belong to the state. This is the modern world. There's three philosophical traditions at work here. The Greeks' commitment to reason, the Christians' commitment to faith, and the post-Kantian modernists' commitment to the idea that the mind is helpless, the state is all-powerful, and the individual must be subordinated to the state. I'm going to just conclude with this point. What they call modern irrationalism, which is true, it's accurate, in modern culture, in art, and politics, and education, modern irrationalism, a product of German philosophy, who set the template in Western society for irrationality? Christianity did. If you can believe that a super consciousness of the universe exists without bodily means and creates the universe from nothing, you can believe anything. You can certainly believe you're morally superior based on racial inheritance. Here's Christianity's cultural legacy. It made irrationality respectable. That's its legacy. After Christianity, anything goes. You could make any irrational claim. You don't need any facts to support it. Now, I gave an argument. I gave you facts to show that there's no God. The primacy of existence is factual. There's no evidence whatever to indicate that consciousness could exist independently of existence, or that it can mold or create existence at will. No evidence whatsoever. That is a faith-based belief. All the evidence is on my side. I gave the argument. Mr. D'Souza did not respond to it. He just made some insulting reference to big R reason and little r reason. That's not going to cut it here, man. There is no God. Accept it. Existence exists. There's no life after death. How do I know that with complete certainty? Because according to the claims that there is life after death, some spirit, some ghost survives without bodily means. And everything we know about consciousness, without exception, shows us that without bodily means, there is no consciousness, which means after death, we die. Now, the conclusion we should take from that is not like the existentialists and be despair because death is the end. The conclusion is we should live with a certain sense of urgency. Life is not a dress rehearsal. It's not it's not preparation for beyond. This is it. We need to fulfill ourselves here and now. And so I urge all of you, think about what you want out of life. Do you want an education in a given field? Do you want romantic love? Do you want children? Do you want a career in a certain field? And then work your hardest and best using of your mind to create those values in your life, and then live a happy, fulfilled life. Values, Ayn Rand points out, are the meaning of life. That's what she means by selfishness. Values are the meaning of life. Fill your life with rational, healthy, life-promoting values. Education, productive career, friendship, romantic love, family. This is the meaning of life. We have to achieve it here. We're not going to get a second chance, and I know that with complete certainty for the reasons I gave. Thank you.
Mr. D'Souza, we'll give you a little extra time to be equitable to issue your final reply.
What do we know with complete certainty? If we lived in the 5th century BC, we would know with complete certainty that there was a sun and a handful of stars, and that's it. There was no knowledge of any other planets, let alone galaxies, and there was no way to find out about them. So, by the Bernsteinian principle, in the 5th century BC, we would know that it's impossible for there to be other galaxies because knowledge just simply didn't reach that far. And since we should go with the principle that what we know is all there is, and there's nothing more to be known apparently, we can proclaim definitively that what we don't know does not even exist. We have a project, by the way, as you know, to search for life on other planets. Is there life on other planets? I don't know. Andrew Bernstein doesn't know either, by the way. Now, let's assume that we adopt his principle, that if there's no proof of something, that is proof that it doesn't exist. So then we would declare in advance, there's no life on other planets, there's not a shred of evidence for life on other planets, ergo, there's no life on other planets. What's the point of even searching? We know that there isn't. By the way, how would we know if there was life on other planets? Let's say we went to the moons of Jupiter or some faraway galaxy. Let's say we went to that surface and we noticed that there were some hieroglyphics there. And we noticed that there were some skyscrapers and some moving vehicles. We would know definitively from the design that somebody did that. There are aliens here. Now, along would come Andrew Bernstein. Well, you can't prove the existence of aliens because who created the aliens? Who the hell knows? But the fact of the matter is that when you see signs of intelligence that we didn't do, we know that someone did them. It would be considered definitive proof of life, of intelligent life outside our galaxy if we could get the Morse code. Or if we could get the eye chart, except it didn't say A, B, P, Q, R, but it said to thine own self be true. We'd recognize that immediately. So what's going on here is that the same standard of open-mindedness, investigation, and ability to infer from design to a designer that we would manifestly do in any other area is suddenly closed off when it comes to God. Suddenly you can't ask, how did the universe get here? He has to proclaim dogmatically, and in fact even embarrass himself by saying things like, the Greeks said that out of nothing you can get nothing, therefore the Big Bang can't be true. Or if the Big Bang is true, it can't possibly mean that something came out of nothing. That is actually what it does mean. And in fact, the philosophical implications were so troubling that when Einstein realized that that is what it does mean, he actually began to alter his own equations and insert a cosmological constant to make it not true. Because he realized that if it is true, then you can't just think of an eternal universe eternally governed by laws, but you have to consider that maybe some kind of a super mind, which is what Einstein ultimately came to believe in, not the biblical God, to be sure, but a sort of grand intelligence that's responsible for the laws of nature themselves. I mean, think about this. The laws of nature are written in code. They're a mathematical code. Galileo said the language of the universe is written in mathematics. And it's taken the most brilliant scientists, from Kepler to Newton to Einstein, to excavate those laws out of nature. Is it unreasonable for us to ask, who wrote the code? How did we get these mathematical formulas that explain the operations of matter, that explain not only what's going on inside this pen, but the same laws are responsible for explaining how galaxies move hundreds of light years away? Who did that? Or does it do itself? Now, in a way, you could say either explanation is possible, but it is the height of dogmatism to insist on matters of such magnitude that human beings from time immemorial have wondered about, to proclaim definitively at our moment in history that we know the answer. That is the kind of anti-intellectual attitude that has forever been the enemy of learning and science and open-mindedness and curiosity and modern knowledge. Finally, with regard to the crimes of Christianity, let's put aside communism and compare, for example, the Salem witch trials, which are, by the way, mythological. In college, I read Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible, the Salem witch trials, against, let's say, the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution grew out of the French Enlightenment. You can say Rousseau was a romantic. Rousseau was fully a creature of the Enlightenment, a correspondent and colleague of Rousseau, D'Alembert, D'Holbach. All these guys were in it together. They were the Enlightenment. So once again, you don't get to duck out from the Enlightenment by essentially expelling its key members. The French Revolution killed tens of thousands of people in a very short time. The Salem witch trials, well, I was in Salem a few years ago. The number of people killed in the Salem witch trials, 19. Now, is that 19 too many? Sure, I'll grant that. But it's simply ridiculous to go on and on about the less than 20 crime of Christianity while ignoring the far greater crimes that are committed in the name of your own ideology. Again, not by those communists in faraway Russia or China, but really right in the heart of Western civilization. And the Nazis were the same thing. Hitler was not inspired by Christianity. He hated Christianity, persecuted the churches, and so on. But Hitler wasn't just a product of the Volk. He was also a product of an interpretation of Darwinism that saw the survival of the fittest as not simply a fact about nature, but a norm for nature. And that's kind of what I take Andrew Bernstein to be doing. He says, out of facts, our desire to survive, come values. Survival becomes not only something we do, but something we ought to do. And since in nature the fittest survive, they conquer and eat and destroy the less fit, why not? It doesn't seem like such a stretch for the Nazis to have made the conclusion that from the fact of survival of the fittest in nature comes the value that the fittest ought to and must, and it is glorious for them to survive, and in that was sown the seeds of the Third Reich. Thank you very much.
We now turn to tonight's Q&A session with the audience. If you have a question, and I would like to emphasize a question for the speakers and not one that you want to answer on your own, please approach one of the microphones to your left or right. We will take one question at a time, alternating from one side to the other. We have 20 minutes for this portion, so please, respectfully, in the interest of time, if you could limit your questions to a couple of sentences, we would all appreciate it and would give others behind you a chance. Sir, if you'd like to, how about the ladies first? The lady first, right?
Okay, this is for both of you. What is your definition of faith and what is your definition of reason? And in a few words, how are they commensurate or contradictory?
Sure. Reason is using our intelligence in the world and trying to draw conclusions based upon what we know. Faith is making a decision. In life, we have to make decisions where full information is not available. If I were courting a woman, deciding whether to marry her, I could use all the reason I can. I plug it all in. And yet, if I were to ask what would life over the next 20 years be like with her, I don't know. So I can say I'm going to be an agnostic and wait for all the data to come in, but the data will never be in. She'll marry someone else or we'll both be dead. And therefore, at some point, I've got to take what I know and I've got to go for it. And that means that's the leap of faith. Faith is not in contradiction to reason. Faith comes in where reason can't go.
By reason, I mean logical, that is non-contradictory thinking applied to facts. Reason is logical, that is non-contradictory thinking about facts, not about faith-based beliefs, but about facts. Faith is belief in the supernatural. It's belief in that which cannot be observed, which goes against all the evidence, which has no evidence to support it, and or goes against the evidence. I gave a good example before from Matthew, that the graves open and the dead rise and walk the streets of Jerusalem. Good example of faith-based beliefs. As like Mark Twain once said, faith is when you believe something you know ain't so. And but the emphasis here is on reason. Reason, again, is logical, non-contradictory thinking about facts. There is no place in the universe where reason, in principle, cannot go. There is no supernatural realm. There's no evidence to support it. It goes against all the evidence. I gave the argument that consciousness depends on existence, and that requires faith.
Sir.
Hi, yes, and speaking of the evolution of Christianity over time, I think Mr. Bernstein had pointed out is the very principles underlying evolution which make it unjust. But D'Souza, I think you pointed out that the crimes perpetrated by Christianity were not characteristic of what Christ taught. I'm just wondering how much authority you put in a religion which develops its morality over time, and if you're willing to accept a religion which is almost extremely different from the Christianity of today in the future.
It's not a matter that the religion evolves over time. It is that any new system of ideas engrafts itself on an existing social system. So, for example, Christianity, just as Muhammad arrives in the society of the Bedouins. Now, in the society of the Bedouins, it was concubinage, rape, pillage, normal practice. What does Muhammad do? He says, listen, you can have polygamy, but limit the number of wives to 4. Right? So the point being here, it's not that, what is Muhammad doing? He's taken the society as it is and offering moral remedies in that context. So what does Christianity do? It comes into a society that's hierarchical, monarchical, extremely violent, infanticide and those sorts of things quite common. And Christianity articulates principles that run counter to that society. Those principles are not immediately implemented. It's not like people immediately say, all right, let's stop doing this. But the principle endures. Lincoln made a very good point on the eve of the Civil War. He said the founders declared the right so that the enforcement could follow when the circumstances permitted. So in other words, it takes a certain amount of moral enlightenment in order to see a principle that's in Christianity, but is so radical that it takes time to implement it. So you look at the anti-slavery guys, they were motivated by Christianity. They were motivated by the biblical idea that we're created equal in the eyes of God. But for many, many centuries, that idea was interpreted purely for the next world. And what was revolutionary was not that the Enlightenment crept in. What was revolutionary is that Christians began to take that otherworldly teaching and apply it to this world. And the anti-slavery movement was not driven by science or the Enlightenment. It was driven by Quakers and evangelicals, Wilberforce in England. Here in America, the abolition movements motivated by the doctrine of equality, which was in Christianity from the beginning.
Would you like to respond?
First I want to respond to Mr. D'Souza, then quickly to the question. The abolitionist movement is 100% generated by the Enlightenment. Which century and where does it begin? If the Christians promote slavery for centuries, Christians happily own slaves, when and where does the abolitionist movement begin? Oh, just by coincidence, it's the 18th century. It's during the Enlightenment. Almost all of the philosophers were abolitionists. Franklin, Voltaire, almost all of them were abolitionists. And the reason, of course, is that man is a reasoning being. He's self-governing. He can be self-governing. It's wrong to hold him in bondage to the state, the church, or the slave owners. Wilberforce, give a lot of the Christians credit. They picked this up from the Enlightenment. It's a historical fact that Wilberforce was well aware of Enlightenment thinking on this, of what the philosophers had to say. In regard to the question, briefly, I just want to reiterate what I said in my talk. Faith-based beliefs is impossible to rationally adjudicate. So if one denomination says, well, Jesus is God, and the other one says, no, Jesus was created by God, but he's not himself God. Where are the facts? What's the evidence? This is the Arian heresy, by the way. There's no way to use rational persuasion to adjudicate this. You simply have passionately held faith-based beliefs with no way to rationally work out the dispute, and hence the endless violence between the Christian denominations, including during the Reformation, Mr. D'Souza. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre was not an aristocratic squabble. It was the Catholics versus the Protestants.
Sir.
Yes, thank you both for a wonderful debate. My question is for Mr. Bernstein. If you take any unit of time, let's say we use days, and all the stuff in this universe existed before the Big Bang, if there was one, in time, in eternity past. The problem with that is you can't mathematically have an infinite series of days before tonight, or else we never get to tonight. So how can you rationally deny that the universe had a beginning?
Dr. Bernstein.
I don't have the slightest idea what he just asked me. I gave the reasons for why creation's impossible. I gave the reasons already. You want me to reiterate?
Well,
consciousness is a metaphysical dependent. Existence is metaphysically independent. It logically precedes consciousness. Consciousness requires something to be conscious of. Consciousness also requires bodily means. All the evidence supports. Now, I agree with Mr. D'Souza about one thing, about being open to new evidence. I think you come to, conclusions that, in our context of knowledge, they're provisionally certain. You're always open to new evidence. There's no evidence whatsoever to indicate that consciousness could exist independently of existence, and that could, by an act of will, can mold or create or shape or make it what it will. All the evidence is on the other side of the argument. Given all the knowledge we have today, creation is a logical impossibility.
Can I respond briefly?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. The two leading atheist scientists in the world are probably Stephen Hawking, physicist, and then the physicist Steven Weinberg, who's right here at the University of Texas in Austin. Now, Stephen Hawking, in his book, The First 3 Minutes, says very clearly that the discovery of the Big Bang came as a nasty shock to the scientific community. Most scientists believed in the steady-state universe. And Weinberg admits that this gave, I'm not quoting him, some comfort to those who believe in a creator. Now, what is the atheist answer to this? Stephen Hawking and Weinberg have a similar answer, and it is an entirely faith-based answer. The answer is, there might be an infinity of multiple universes out there, none of which for which there is the slightest empirical evidence whatsoever. They are merely posited. Posited why? To explain the peculiarities of our universe. So, in fact, by Andrew Bernstein's own reasoning, the entire physics and astronomical community's speculations about multiple universes should be dismissed prima facie as irrational nonsense, because there's no empirical evidence for it at all. But the truth of it is that these issues are in the mainstream of modern physics and astronomy because to deny one invisible God, you have to make up an infinity of invisible universes. And so there are two choices. I agree, God or an infinity of universes, none of which we've ever seen except our own. It's a faith-based choice. I'd like to believe in multiple universes. I don't think I have that much faith.
Sir.
My question is primarily for Dinesh.
Speak up just a little, I'm sorry.
My question is for both of you, but primarily Dinesh. Given that the prompt asks, what is Christianity good for the world? I think we could ignore the past for a second, and it's done some good and some bad, and we've secularized a lot of the good things. But right now, moving forward, given a lot of the barriers Christianity is posing to education in our schools, to civil rights and the gay rights movement, how can you defend that Christianity is good right now?
That's a very good question. I would answer it this way. I think very often in these issues, we sort of miss the forest for the trees. And so when we think of Christianity today, most people would associate it with like abortion, school prayer, gay marriage. If I were to ask myself, why am I a Christian? I would say this. I can think of myself as a material object in the universe, a product of quarks and random forces. I could think that I have no free will because my decisions are the product of neurons in my brain over which I have no direct control. I could think that life has no purpose, and when I die, I'll become nothing. I could think that way, and reason allows me to do that. But reason also allows me to think that my life is part of a larger cosmic drama. That, in other words, there is a creator of the universe, and that the universe actually has a story. It has a point. That life itself has a purpose. That ultimately the sad injustice of our world, in which many times bad guys end up on top and good guys come to grief, will actually be compensated in another life. In other words, that there is cosmic justice. Christianity gives me an experience of the sublime. In secular life, we almost get no experience of the sublime. Occasionally with art, sometimes, quite honestly, in sexual intercourse, but it is brief and evanescent. With Christianity, the sublime is embedded in everyday life. You get the sense that life has depth, complexity, purpose, meaning. So then there's consolation for life after death. Fact of the matter is, you and I, we don't think about it now, you're too young, but the grave digger waits for us all, and death is a terrifying experience. So we have to face it no matter what. We can either face it believing that there's something coming after, which will actually make that experience more bearable, or we can just face it grimly saying nothing's going to come after. Now my point is, maybe nothing's going to come after, but we don't know. He is choosing to believe that nothing comes after, and it defines his morality. I'm choosing to believe that something does come after, and it defines my outlook. And I'm simply saying that if I just look at it as a practical matter, Christianity is delivering me practical goods that enrich my life in the world, and that ultimately is why I'm a Christian.
Would you like to reply?
Hell yeah, hell yeah. Hopefully, Dinesh, we can debate this topic again, and maybe one day you'll actually answer my arguments. But, you know, what I want to say is this. Reason is mankind's survival instrument. I established that you read Atlas Shrugged for this. This life is the one chance we get. Consequently, we need to make life on Earth amenable to human beings. We need to institute, I think Dinesh and I agree on this, institute the principle of individual rights. Your life belongs to you, your mind belongs to you, you are free to choose rational values, healthy life-promoting values, like I said before, in education, career, friendship, romantic love, you know, family, travel, etc. And you fill your life with meaning. Values are the meaning of life. So we have to live with a certain sense of urgency because death is the end. And we need to establish a free society because it's only the United States of America is the greatest country of history, the nation of the Enlightenment, in fact. We need to establish a free society that human beings, you know, free for women have the right to their own bodies, homosexuals have the right to marry, et cetera, that human individuals then can achieve flourishing life on earth in a free society established on the principle of individual rights. And that is the meaning of life, the achievement of values that make your life fulfilled, not faith-based fantasy that there's some God directing this or that I might have some life in the end. There's no evidence to support that. All the evidence is on the other side.
Sir?
Thank you. One of the key arguments, it seems, one of the key arguments, I think, from Mr. Bernstein is that that Christians and those who follow the teachings of Jesus have become subservient to that belief system, and some of them have done bad things. Couldn't that be applied to any belief system, including objectivism or the teachings of Ayn Rand?
A short reply from both.
Why don't you answer since it's directly to you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think some people who call themselves objectivists are words that I can't even say in public. And they do things that I find bizarre, irrational, destructive, harmful, hurtful. But I'll just say this, you know, to the extent that somebody's an objectivist and he recognizes reason not only is the means of dealing with nature, the means of, you know, growing food and building houses and everything, but reason is the means of dealing with human beings. So the initiation of force is out, and we deal with each other by rational persuasion. Notice that if somebody's following objectivism and they disagree passionately on some philosophical principle, what do? Do they recommend burning each other at the stake? No. They stop talking to each other. They shun each other. They go their separate ways. And they simply agree to disagree. But there's no point in insulting individual Christians or any religion, Judaism, Islam. It's a faith-based philosophy, and there's no way to rationally adjudicate it. And consequently, you get, in religion, the burnings at the stake, the beheadings, the endless religious wars. Europe 1,000 years ago in the Dark Ages under the Catholic Church was almost identical to the Islamic world today. There's a Christian Dark Age, and today, since 1200 AD, since the Muslims rejected Greek rationalism and imposed faith on Islamic society, they burned the books of Averroes, Avicenna, and the Islamic world's been in a Dark Age for 800 years. It's almost identical to the Dark Age in Europe caused by Christianity. Faith-based system. Religion is hazardous to your health. I mean, that's the conclusion here. It suppresses reason, mankind's survivalism for faith.
Mr. D'Souza.
You think about Christianity and ask a simple question. What new value did Christianity bring into the world? I think I would answer it brought into the world the new value of forgiveness. In ancient Judaism, there is the idea of an eye for an eye, justice. I think we'd have to admit that that actually comports with strict justice. If somebody comes to your tribe and kills 10 people, you have every right to go to their tribe and kill 10 people. But the inside of Christianity is that that leaves 20 people dead. Forgiveness is actually a very interesting idea because it involves no denial of the horror of the crime. It fully takes it on board. And yet it agrees to, through a tremendous moral exertion, overlook it. Act as if it didn't happen while knowing full well that it did. There is no such principle in any other religion that I know of. There's no such principle in secular philosophy in and of itself, unless adopted from Christianity. And yet it's the most radical principle the world has ever seen. It is the only way in a sad world in which there have been so many terrible things inflicted on so many people to actually move forward. The way that Mandela was able to move forward in South Africa. The whites had been oppressing the blacks for decades. Should the blacks not turn around and kill as many whites or more as the whites had killed blacks? And think of where that would end. The whole principle of reconciliation that went on in South Africa was entirely based on the Christian principle that the guys who did the crime must acknowledge it, but having acknowledged it, the very people that they did it to must forgive them. That is the radical message of Jesus still alive in the world today. And so, to just go around talking about reason and superstition and why faith is bad and so on fails to acknowledge the Christian organizations all over the world that are actually inventing things, dispensing food, St. Jude's Hospital, the Red Cross. In other words, Christians are acting in the world, and Andrew Bernstein is making philosophical arguments about why the whole thing shouldn't exist. If you actually remove Christianity from the world today, the religious-based schools would close down, the hospitals would close down, Doctors Without Borders would shut its doors, the Red Cross would have to close down, and in other words, innumerable goods that are going on in the world now. And these are not acts of government coercion, they're private charity, so they're completely consistent with a free society. And Christianity is doing, and when Christianity stops doing, the state steps in. So you'd think that there'd be some measure of gratitude for what in the private sphere is being done to alleviate human suffering, so the power of the government doesn't have to be increased.
Fewer than 2 minutes remain in our allotted time. Don't kill the messenger. I have to keep time here. So we must end with a concise question from this gentleman, allow both to respond, and then we'll move to final closing statements.
Dr. Bernstein, in my lifetime, it's been reported to me of various events that have taken place that fall outside the context of what we know to be natural law. These events are called miracles. They are events that have been studied by people who are knowledgeable of and experts in natural law, and they fall outside of this law. As a matter of fact, these events fall contrary to these natural laws. In order for me to accept the fact that these miracles are taking place, I must have faith in a deity, a higher power, a supernatural power, a power that has created these laws that we all live by, and therefore that miracle is a transposition.
A question? Sorry, we need
Explain my lack of my faith, why my faith is ill-founded when I can look at a miracle and say it is actually taking place.
Dr. Bernstein.
Notice the questioner conspicuously failed to give a single example of what the hell he's talking about. I mean,
There you go.
What miracles are we talking about? I mean, I referenced Matthew several times. The graves open, the dead rise and walk the streets of Jerusalem. You believe that? You know, men live inside whales, virgins give birth, burning bushes speak. The reason this stuff is nonsense is because it violates the law of identity. Bushes can't speak. You know why? They got nothing to say. That's why. They have no brain with which to formulate any thoughts. They're incapable of thinking or speaking, and to believe it takes faith. I mean, it's a free country, and I absolutely support your right to believe in miracles. But your right to believe in them, or somebody else's right to believe in them, is not in itself evidence that such events ever took place. Or could take place.
Your reply?
If I was standing in front of a bush and I heard a voice, I wouldn't obtusely conclude that the bush is speaking. I would conclude that there was someone behind the bush that was speaking. The Christian view is not that the bush spoke. It's that God spoke behind the bush. Now, you haven't refuted that in the slightest. The point about miracles is this. If in 30 years modern technology enabled a dead man to be restored to life, we would simply call it a scientific advance. That a guy who's clinically dead can be restored on the hospital table. But if that is possible, then it follows that dead people can, in fact, be restored to life. There's nothing in modern science that declares this impossible. The fact of the matter is we cannot pretend that the natural laws we know here and now are all the natural laws that exist. Our knowledge of what is possible is very limited. So if a man can be restored to life 30 years from now, then the dead can be restored to life, and the biblical description of dead men being restored to life may be true or may be false, but is most certainly not impossible.
This concludes our Q&A portion. To put a bow on this thing, we will allow each debater 2 minutes to wrap up, to offer some final concluding words. Dr. Bernstein, you're first. Your 2 minutes begin now.
I want to begin by commenting on Dinesh's last comment. He's saying that if medical science can restore, in 30 years from now, can restore people from clinical death to life, therefore miracles might exist. First of all, notice it's a complete hypothetical with no examples to support it. But beyond that, if that were to happen, that's not a miracle. That means it's within the laws of nature that dead guys can be brought back to life by medical means, by scientific means. There's no divine intervention there to raise the dead. Dinesh is talking about scientific advance. So we're talking about events that can occur within the laws of nature. A miracle means something that violates the laws of nature and that is caused by God. Now, my final wrap up. I just want to stress the positive here. Again, what I said all through tonight. Reason is man's instrument of survival. Reason is the source of all human values on this earth. We need to fall in love with reason. This is the way to promote human life on earth. Anything that suppresses the rational mind, whether it's faith, whether it's the emotionalism of the Nazis, whether it's the philosophical materialism of the communists, whether it's dictatorship of any kind, secular or theocratic, suppresses man's mind, and you see the collapse of civilization. The real struggle in human history is not religion versus secularism. That's only one example of it. The real struggle in human history is reason versus unreason, rationalism versus irrationalism, those who support the mind and those who oppose it. The Greeks generally supported the mind and made tremendous advances. The Muslims in the Middle Ages embraced Greek science, to some extent Greek philosophy, and they made tremendous advances. Ultimately, Islam suppressed that. Faith-based belief suppressed it. They're in a dark age for 800 years. In the West, Christianity suppressed the Greek approach. Notice There's no advances in the Western world until the Greeks rediscover until the Christians rediscover the Greeks in Spain, and you see great minds like Thomas Aquinas and Albertus Magnus embracing Aristotle, and they're Christian Aristotelians, and it's the Aristotelian part, the commitment to fact-based, observation-based rationality that leads to the medieval Renaissance and then to the Italian Renaissance. You see when men embrace reason, the Greeks, the Muslims at one time, the Christians to some degree during the medieval Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the creation of America. When men embrace reason, they create civilizations. When the men of unreason tear civilizations down. And that battle simply goes on and on and on. Like I said, Christianity set the template in the West for irrationality. On Christian beliefs, you can believe anything. And Christianity inevitably is suppressive of the independent rational mind and consequently caused a dark age that lasted for over 1,000 years. That was real Christianity. What Dinesh is talking about today are westernized, Americanized, secular Christians who do good things, in this lifetime. You don't need Christianity for that. You need goodwill. In fact, what you need is the principle of individual rights to liberate the human mind. Let me close with one example. Mother Teresa or these so-called saints of charity, these faith-based saints of charity, maybe they do some good. Not much. At best, what do? They hold the hands of the leper and console him while he dies. The men of reason cure leprosy. I mean, they cure the diseases. This is what you depend on reason, not faith for this. So fall in love with reason, with rational values, and go out and live a life in a free country. Let's get the Democrats out of office. I agree with Mr. D'Souza on that. Let's live in a... I liked Dinesh's movie 2016. Not that I'm a Republican, but the Democrats are statists, they're socialists. Let's reestablish a free society in this country, and individuals then achieve rational values and flourish.
Well, I'm glad that we can find some common ground, and perhaps this will lead to another debate in the future, and you could be on the same side of the table. Mr. D'Souza, your closing remarks.
This has been a lot of fun and very challenging and very enlightening. Notice that in the debate, we've had a debate conducted in the vocabulary of reason alone. Not once in this debate have I appealed to authority, to revelation. I don't, to my knowledge, recall ever quoting the Bible. I've used the same language of reason, the language of the university, to engage this topic. And the point I want to make is that whoever you agree with, I think you can see that reason is not a monopoly of either side. Reason is not something the atheists own. Both sides can invoke reason to their cause, and therefore we have to give reasons for what we believe. Now, Andrew Bernstein said that if there's suffering, people of goodwill. Actually, no. If there was an earthquake tomorrow in Rwanda, you would notice that many of the countries in the world would pretend as if it never happened. There's a lot of wealth in China. The Chinese would basically shrug. There's a lot of oil money in the Middle East. The Muslims would look over their shoulder and go, well, the Indians wouldn't care. But somehow in Western civilization, in Europe and America, all kinds of activity would occur. Church groups are sending bags of food, and there's this and there's that, and it's a humanitarian crisis, and the US government should do something, and so on. Here's my point. Europe and America are, whether we like to admit it or not, the products of a Christian culture. And lots of people may not go to church, but that Christianity has been drilled into them over the centuries. Even when the Christianity is subtracted, its humanitarian impulses remain. These are not universal impulses. These are impulses that are driven by a specific ideology that took root in the West. Now, is it all the product of the Enlightenment? I don't think so. And I think if we want to look at the complexity of this, look at a guy like Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was a man of the Enlightenment. And yet, when this man of the Enlightenment was dispatched by the founders to tell us where our rights come from, did he answer, the social contract? They come from reason itself. No, he said, these rights come from our Creator, period. The Creator is the only stated source of rights given by the man of the Enlightenment himself. This man of the Enlightenment, who was, by the way, not an Orthodox Christian, would sit with the Bible and a pair of scissors and cut out the miracles that he didn't like. This same man, whenever he talked about something truly profound, and in this case I'm thinking here of slavery. Once again, Jefferson had very few qualms about slavery itself. In fact, while Washington freed his slaves upon his death, Jefferson never did. Jefferson had 200 slaves and didn't free, except for Sally Hemings' family, he basically did not free them. And yet this same slave owner and Southern planter and man of the Enlightenment, when he began to talk about slavery, you'll notice his language becomes very religious. Can the Almighty take sides with us in such a contest? I tremble for my country when I recall that God is just, and so on and so on. In other words, even this man of Athens was imbued, if you will, by the ethics of Jerusalem. And no amount of scientific advances, of curing leprosy and so on, can cure death, can cure suffering, can wipe a tear off every face. You know, in Gandhi's phrase, there is always going to be a need for that human touch, motivated not by evolutionary selfishness, kin altruism, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, but rather by this doctrine of universal brotherhood that I think cannot be fully assimilated into evolutionary selfishness, but rather reaches to the stranger, the guy who has nothing in common with me, who can do nothing for me. And yet, by me doing something for him, not through the state, but in the private sphere, it calls upon the highest impulses of humanity. Those highest impulses are not, they're in humanity. Even the atheist has them. But what Christianity did was develop them, encourage them, create systems that foster them. Those systems are still with us today, and that's why ultimately Christianity has been, on the balance, a great force for good in the world. Thank you very much.
These closing remarks from each speaker conclude our program. I would like to ask all of us to join in thanking the University of Texas at Austin, the Objectivist Society, for their tireless effort in putting this event on. My personal thanks for inviting me to moderate. And last but not least, our two speakers today who traveled from a long way away to come here and put on a show for us. So our sincere thanks.
That was fun. That was fantastic. Yeah, we are today's objectivism.
Drive safe. Scratch that. We got a final remark here.
Need this?
Thank you all so much for coming and making this event a success. If you are interested in learning more about objectivism, the UT Objectivism Society meets every Tuesday at 6 in Garrison Hall. More information is available at the table in the lobby. Thank you so much to Dinesh D'Souza and Andrew Bernstein for sharing your perspectives on this incredibly important topic. I'm told that the UT employees here would love to rejoin their families, but we can't make that happen until this entire facility shuts down. So please make your exits rather expedient. Look down at your feet. Make sure that you bring everything out that you brought in. And even if you see trash that is not yours, please pick it up on your way out. Thank you all so much for coming.